there is a moment in the very first episode of The Amazing World of Gumball, where the family pet stands up, learns to walk on two legs, and quietly joins the household as a son. The family adopts him on the spot, as if this were a thing that just happens, sometimes, and they never quite explain why it works, or why a goldfish has lungs, or why one of the children is a pink rabbit, and the other is a blue cat, and the mother is also a blue cat, and the father is a much taller pink rabbit, and the show just smiles and walks past it. The Amazing World of Gumball is built on a long, careful list of things it refuses to explain. And tonight on Cortoon, we are going through all of them. Every quiet inconsistency, every dropped thread, every half-answered theory, the void and the villain and the family tree, the things the show points at and never finishes the sentence about. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these long, slow ones. We can begin with the secret the show itself seems to know about, because it built an entire episode around it, and then refused to tell you what that episode was actually for. The void, as Gumball and Darwin start calling it once they find their way in, is presented as the place where the show's forgotten ideas go to disappear. Failed sketches, abandoned scenes, characters who never quite worked. All of it ends up in a soft, washed-out color space behind the walls of Elmore. On a first watch, it is a clever, self-aware comedy beat, the writers admitting they have to throw things away, like every animated production does. On a second watch, it stops being only that. The void is the only place in the show where the characters can step outside their own canon and look at the leftover material the writers made and rejected. And the way the episode treats it, with a strange, quiet sadness, suggests something the show never quite spells out. The argument the void seems to be making, if you sit with it long enough, is that the world of Elmore is not a stable, finished thing at all, but a working draft. The characters who survive to the screen are not the only versions of themselves that ever existed. There are earlier drafts of Gumball, earlier drafts of Darwin, earlier drafts of the parents, all of them apparently real enough to feel rejection, all of them apparently aware enough to be afraid of the place they have been sent to. The show never confirms it, but the implication is that Elmore is being watched and edited and rewritten in real time, that someone with a great deal of power decides who is canon and who is forgotten, and that the void is the rubbish bin into which the failed drafts are slid. Fans have run with this for years, treating it as proof of the simulation reading of the show, but the show itself, to its credit, never lifts the lid on it. It shows you a place where deleted things go. It refuses to tell you who deletes them. And that refusal, that quiet, patient withholding, becomes the model for almost every secret the show ever sets up. It shows you a door. It will not open it. It will, however, keep walking past it for years and trust you to notice. Sitting in plain sight beside the void is a thin, blue, almost transparent figure who follows Gumball through several of the show's most uneasy episodes, and whose backstory the show genuinely never resolves. Rob, as he eventually calls himself, begins his existence as a one-off background character, a small alien shape glimpsed in a freezer, an extra in a crowd. The show then does something strange. It builds an entire arc out of the question of whether a forgotten background character would notice that he was being forgotten. Rob falls into the void in an early episode, sits there in the wash of discarded ideas, and comes back out aware of everything. He knows he is in a show. He knows Gumball is the protagonist. He knows the rules of his own world are not consistent. He sets himself up as the villain because, in his reading, he has been written into a corner and he wants out. And he treats Gumball not as a friend turned enemy, but as the obstacle between him and an exit. What the show never explains is what an exit would actually look like. Rob never makes a clear statement of his goal. He talks around it. He gestures at endings, at deletion, at versions of the world where he is the one being watched. He destroys Elmore in one episode and the show resets without comment. He hijacks the opening credits. He stares directly at the audience. And then, in the final stretch of the run, the show simply lets him go quiet. There is no last confrontation. There is no defeat, no redemption, no merge with the void, no reconciliation, no moment where he sits down and says what he wants. He is one of the only fully developed antagonists in modern animation who is allowed to walk out of his own arc without a finish. Fans have spent the years since the show went on hiatus trying to fill that gap. with theories ranging from him being a stand-in for the audience to him being the show's own fear of its eventual cancellation. But none of those readings are confirmed. What is confirmed is that the show built a character around the question of who decides what counts as canon, and then never told you the answer. Underneath both of those threads is the largest of them, the one the show has flirted with so many times that fans have built a whole reading of the series around it. The simulation theory, as it usually gets stated, says that Elmore is not a real place but a manufactured one, that the inconsistent art styles you see on screen are not just gags but evidence that the world is being assembled from different sources, that the meta jokes are not jokes at all but small scared admissions from the characters that they know what they are. The show never confirms this. What it does over and over is plant the seeds for it and then refuse to water them in any one direction. You can see it in the very design of the world, where the family lives in a hand-painted suburb, but the bus driver is a stop-motion puppet, and the policeman is a live-action photograph of a real cardboard cutout, and the cloud is a rendered three-dimensional shape, and the dinosaur kid is what looks like a museum diorama. The show treats this as normal. None of the characters ever remark on it inside their own logic. They will, however, occasionally remark on it in moments of stress, when the rules of the world start to bend, and in those moments the show seems to be quietly admitting that everyone in Elmore knows, at some level, that they are made of different things. The most unsettling reading is that Elmore is a kind of repository, a place where every kind of cartoon and every kind of medium can sit side by side, because none of them are quite alive. The show flirts with this in its tone, in the way the characters sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if listening to something off-screen. It flirts with it in the way the parents, particularly the mother, occasionally look exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with the joke being told. It flirts with it most openly in the episodes that break the fourth wall, where Gumball will turn directly to the camera and acknowledge in a calm, almost resigned voice that he is in a program. And then the show pulls the curtain back down, returns to its sitcom rhythm, and never lets the moment become canon. There is no episode where Gumball figures it out. There is no episode where the family sits down at the table and discusses what they are. There is only a long series of glances at the camera and a long series of moments where the world flickers, and the show, by the end of its run, has trained you to accept the flicker as part of the texture without ever giving you a frame to put it in. From the cosmology, we drift inward to the family tree itself and the way the show built it as a long, patient mystery, and then resolved only the parts of it that did not matter. The Watterson household, as you meet it in the first episode, is the loudest possible argument for the idea that nothing in this world is supposed to make sense. The father is a tall, pink, round-eared rabbit. The mother is a small, slender blue cat. Their biological son is a slightly larger, slightly thinner blue cat. Their daughter is a small pink rabbit. The maths is internally consistent if you accept that hair color and species are roughly handed down on the parents' lines. But the show never quite explains how a rabbit and a cat became a couple, or why their friends and neighbors and teachers and shopkeepers treat the arrangement as completely ordinary. The world of Elmore is built on a quiet, total acceptance of mixed species families, and that acceptance is part of the show's warmth. It is also one of its strangest withheld facts. The closest the show ever gets to addressing the underlying biology is in the two-part origin episode, where it walks Nicole and Richard back to their first meeting, as far as fans have pieced together at summer camp, and shows you their first kiss and shows you the moment Gumball is born, and trusts you to fill in the rest. What it never tells you is what kind of place Elmore is, where this is normal. It never tells you whether this town is unusual, or whether the whole world looks like this. It never gives you a frame in which a cat and a rabbit having a child together is, biologically, the same act as a cat and a rabbit having a child together would be in any other show. It shows you the love and asks you to leave it there. Read warmly. This is the show treating its blended town as a quiet utopia, where the only thing that matters about a family is that it is a family. Read more carefully. It is the show admitting that the rules of Elmore are not the rules of biology, and that everyone living in it has at some level agreed not to ask. Either reading is available, the show never tells you which one to pick. Inside that household, Nicole carries the past nobody talks about, and the show paints around it for years without ever giving you the full picture. You meet her in the first episode as a stressed, working mother trying to hold a chaotic family together, and the show is content for several seasons to treat her as that, and only that. Then, slowly, it starts to suggest that she has been carrying something. The early hints are small. She talks about her parents in clipped, defensive tones. She bristles when she is reminded of her own childhood. She seems uncomfortable around the kind of perfect, ordered, achievement, obsessed household she clearly grew up in. The show finally lets you meet her parents in a later episode, and what it shows you is a pair of cold, controlled, expectations-heavy figures. The kind of cat parents who measured every breath their daughter took, and who quietly disowned her when she chose Richard. The show plays this for warmth, ultimately, because Nicole forgives them, and the family reconciles, and there is a hug. What the show leaves on the table is everything else. It never tells you what Nicole did in the years between leaving her parents and meeting Richard. It never tells you what her training as a fighter actually was, only that she has it, and that the show keeps using it as a punchline. It never tells you what she gave up to become the woman who works at the Rainbow Factory and comes home to a husband who is, by her own admission, a project she has been working on for 2 decades. The show makes her, quietly, into the most carefully drawn character on the cast, and then refuses to give you her interior in any kind of complete form. Read sympathetically. This is the show respecting her by not over-explaining her. Read another way. It is one of the show's biggest unfinished sentences, because the more time you spend with Nicole, the more clearly you can see that the woman you are watching has had a whole, unhappy, fully formed life that the show has chosen, for its own reasons, not to walk you through. Richard Zeed's side of the family carries a different kind of absence, and the question of who the Watterson household lost long before you met them. The show goes years without mentioning him. Richard, for the entire early run of the series, talks about his mother in ways that suggest there was no father, that he grew up alone with her, that she raised him by herself. He is presented lovingly and a little tragically, as a man who never had a model for what a father looked like, which is why he is, by his own confused admission, not a very good one. The show finally, in a later season, gives you Frankie Watterson, a charming, irresponsible, lifelong runaway, who shows up at the door and immediately wins the kids over, and just as quickly lets the family down. What the show does well is the resolution, the moment where Richard chooses to be a better father than the one who walked away from him, because he has finally seen with his own eyes what the alternative looks like. What it does not do, and what fans have spent a lot of time wondering about, is the rest. It does not tell you in any detailed way what Frankie spent all those decades doing. It does not tell you why he came back when he did. It does not tell you whether he stayed in the family's life after the episode ended. It introduces him, uses him, sends him back out into the world, and then mostly stops talking about him. He is one of the only major reveals in the show's later run, and the show treats him with the same restraint it gives every other secret, which is to say, it shows you the door, it walks you up to it, and it lets you decide whether to keep looking. Across the lunch table from Gumball sits another mystery the show invented just to refuse to solve it, and the question of what was actually underneath Penny's shell. For the first 2 seasons, Penny is drawn as a small pink peanut-shaped creature with antlers, and the show treats her as Gumball's love interest in the simplest possible terms. He likes her. She likes him. The two of them dance around it. Then, in one of the boldest sequences in the show's run, Penny breaks her shell open, and what comes out of it is not a fixed form at all, but a shifting, fluid, fairy-like creature who can change shape at will. The show treats this with great care. Her family is shown to be shapeshifters in disguise. Her father, in particular, has built his identity around hiding what he and his family really are. Penny's breakthrough is treated sensibly as a metaphor for letting go of a kind of inherited shame. What the show never explains, and what the wiki itself is careful to flag as ambiguous, is what kind of creature she actually is. She is not a fairy in any folkloric sense. She is not a shapeshifter in any easy taxonomy. She is something the show invents to make a point about hiding, and then leaves uncategorized. There are episodes after her transformation where she appears in different shapes, and the show makes no effort to tell you which one is real. There are moments where she looks almost human, and moments where she looks like an animal, and moments where she looks like an abstract drawing of light. The show does not pretend any of these are her true form. It seems to be arguing gently that the question of a true form is the wrong question. That, however, is the interpretation. The fact is that one of the central characters in the show is, by the end of the run, a being whose actual nature has never been pinned down, and whose changes happen without commentary, and whose family's deeper history with hiding is never quite walked back to its source. The show shows you the shell breaking. It does not show you what was always inside. Drifting from one floor to another inside that same school, you reach Carrie, the ghost in the attic, and the larger question the show keeps asking about her without ever quite answering it. Carrie is introduced as a small, floating, sheet-thin ghost girl, with no body and no apparent solid presence, and the show plays this as a quiet, melancholic running gag for most of its first half. She cannot eat, she cannot touch, she drifts. The show occasionally lets her possess another character to enjoy something physical, and then sends her back into her drift and treats this as her ordinary life. What it never quite tells you, in plain language, is who she was. The show implies in scattered moments that ghosts in Elmore are not metaphors or design choices, but actual former people. It shows you her father, in his own ghost form in a house that looks as if it has been waiting for someone to come home for a long time. It hints at a death, gently, never as a hard fact, never with a date or a circumstance, never with a story you could tell back. Carrie is the show's clearest acknowledgement that death exists in this world, and that some of the characters you are watching have already crossed through it, and that the show is going to talk about it only in the quietest possible way, in passing between jokes. There is an entire run of the show where Carrie quietly becomes a more grounded presence, picks up a body sometimes, dates Darwin, sits at lunch with the other kids, and you slowly stop thinking of her as a ghost at all. And then the show, with the lightest possible hand, will put her in a moment where she remembers that she is one. And you realize that the cheerful goth girl at the lunch table is also a child who is no longer alive, and the show has never made you sit with that directly. It has only let it drift past the way she does. The unanswered question, the one the show never opens, is the obvious one. When did she die? Where? How? Who was she before? The show treats those questions as none of your business, and treats her, instead, as a character. The interpretation the show seems to want you to land on is that some kinds of loss become so old they turn into personality. The fact, as far as the show ever states it, is only this. There is a girl in the cast who is dead, and the show is comfortable with that, and it never asks you to be comfortable, just to keep watching. Out in the streets of Elmore, you keep running into the same long, gangly figure in different uniforms and the question of what kind of person Rocky Robinson is supposed to be. He is one of the show's quietest little experiments, a sweet, vague, drifting personality with a live-action style design who shows up in dozens of jobs across the series. He is the bus driver. He is the cinema usher. He is the night security guard. He is the lifeguard. He is the ice cream man. He is the substitute teacher, briefly. He is the moving man. He is, in the show's own quiet running joke, every odd job in Elmore, all at once. All worked by the same man who never seems to remember he was just doing the previous one. The show plays this for warmth, mostly because Rocky is gentle, and the kids like him, and the gag is that he is doing what he can. What the show never explains is why one person ends up holding so many of the town's small marginal jobs, or what his life looks like when he is not at one of them, or why the world seems to need him in so many places at once. The implication, if you sit with it, is that Elmore is a town where the same person can be in many roles because the world is not entirely populated, that there are fewer adults than there appear to be, and that some of the background figures you assume are different people are actually the same person reused. That reading is interpretation, not canon, and the show would never quite let you pin it down. What is canon is that Rocky exists in a strange professional limbo that the show never offers an account of, and that he is, by some quiet count, one of the most present adult characters in the run, and that the show never tells you what he wants. A floor below all of that, in the kitchen and the unpaid bills on the table, the household finances of the Wattersons are something the show is openly fascinated by and never resolves. From the very first episodes, you are told explicitly that this family is broke. The mortgage is overdue. The car is held together by tape and good intentions. Richard is, for the run of most of the show, out of work in a way that the writers do not soften. Nicole is the one bringing in money, and the show is careful to make her job a real thing with real bosses and real exhaustion. And yet the Wattersons live in a house, with a garden, with 2 bedrooms upstairs and a basement, with a working kitchen and a working bathroom, and the kids go to a real school and there is food on the table and the lights are on, and the world keeps spinning. The show makes 1,000 small jokes about money trouble and never quite shows you the family losing the house. It threatens it. It builds entire episodes around the threat. And then, episode by episode, the house holds. The show seems to be making an argument here that fans have spent years discussing. The argument is roughly this. The Wattersons are not unusual. Their precarity is the world's normal. Every family in Elmore lives one bad month from the kind of disaster Nicole is constantly bracing for, and the show is interested, quietly, in how that feels from the inside. It is a children's cartoon doing a working-class drama with the volume turned all the way down. What it never explains, however, is the mechanics. It never tells you in any concrete detail what they actually owe. It never tells you in any concrete detail how Nicole's salary covers what it covers. It never tells you why Richard, who occasionally takes a job and is occasionally surprisingly capable, does not work. It hints at the answer in moments with great care. There is something in Richard the show treats as gentle, fragile, almost wounded, and it seems to be quietly suggesting that the man you are watching has spent his life avoiding becoming his own father, and that work is, for him, a place where that fear comes calling. That reading is interpretation. The fact is that the show set up a financial story it never closed, and the question of how the Wattersons keep their house is, by the end of the run, an open one. Step outside the front door and you arrive at a stranger question, the one about Elmore itself, and the long, careful way the show refuses to tell you where you are. There is no state. There is no country. The town has a name, and the school has a name, and a handful of streets and buildings have names, and the rest is a kind of carefully managed blur. You are never told what region of which world this town belongs to. The newspapers, when you see them, are local. The television, when you see it, is local. The radio, when you hear it, is local. The bigger world exists because the family occasionally takes a road trip, but every time they cross the town limits, the show seems to grow uneasy, as if it does not quite know what is out there, and it returns the family to Elmore as quickly as it can. There are episodes where the family goes camping, episodes where they go to a hotel, episodes where they go to a theme park, and almost all of them end with a return. The show seems to be making a quiet argument that the world ends roughly at the town sign, which fits the simulation reading and fits the smaller, gentler reading of a sitcom that is interested only in its corner of the world. What it does not give you in any episode is a confident map. There is no overhead view of the town. There is no atlas. There is no border. There are only the streets you keep walking down. Read warmly. This is the show telling you that family is the only geography that matters. Read more strangely, it is the show admitting that beyond the painted backgrounds, there is no there. Either way, Elmore is one of the most precisely defined and least geographically situated towns in modern animation, and the show, as ever, never tells you which reading to land on. Back inside the Watterson living room, the smallest member of the family is doing something the show quietly notices and never announces. Inez, the youngest Watterson, a small pink rabbit, is by some distance the most intelligent person in the household. The show plays this for jokes constantly. She solves problems the adults cannot solve. She handles paperwork her father cannot read. She rolls her eyes at things that scare her brothers. And the show, over its run, lets you in on something quieter, which is that this child is also lonely. She does not have peers her own age. The other children in her class are background figures. Her family's loving but exhausting and not really her equals in the way they ought to be. The show, in scattered moments, lets her crack. It shows you small flashes of bitterness, small moments where she is tired of being the responsible one, small scenes where she wishes for a different kind of family. It is one of the most subtle long arcs in modern animation, the slow exhaustion of the smartest person in a chaotic house. And it is also one of the show's biggest withheld answers, because it never quite tells you what happens to that child as she grows. The show is set, broadly, in a present that does not let its characters age past their starting points, and Anais will not get to grow up on screen unless the show comes back. The implication in the calmer episodes is that she will be fine, that she will find her place, that she will leave Elmore at the first chance she gets and build a life she wants. The show never confirms this, because it cannot, because by the time the run paused, there was no episode where any of the kids had grown up. There is, however, a quiet, sad reading of her arc in which the show is showing you the kind of childhood that turns into a particular kind of adulthood, and the question of what Anais becomes is one of the show's largest unfinished sentences. Beside her, at the table, is the lie the show tells you in its opening sentence and never quite walks back. You are told at the start of the very first episode that Darwin was the family's pet goldfish, and that he grew legs and stood up and became their son. This is the show's foundational gag, and it is also the only kind of evolution the show ever takes seriously. Darwin remembers being a fish. He still breathes water sometimes. He treats his earlier life as his own, even though the show, in odd, scattered moments, lets you understand that something else might be going on. There are episodes where the show suggests that Darwin is not exactly what he says he is, that his memories are fragile, that the family's account of his origin is the version everyone has agreed on, rather than the version that is necessarily true. The show does very little with this. It plants the seeds and lets them sit. In one episode in particular, Darwin behaves in a way that suggests he might be a much older creature than his appearance suggests, a kind of small, patient, ancient thing in the body of a young fish boy. And the show treats this as a joke and does not return to it. In another episode, the family's memory of him is challenged, and the show does not quite resolve which version of him is the original. What the show never tells you is what he actually is. Read in the simplest way. He is a goldfish who became a brother, because love can do that in a town like this. Read more carefully. He is a being whose origin none of the characters can quite get straight, and whose name the show has not allowed any of them to examine. He carries a famous biologist's surname, and the show plays on that occasionally, but never makes anything of the larger question of what he is supposed to be, evolutionarily, as a creature. He is the kindest character in the show, and arguably the most loved, and the show, while telling you a story about him in every episode, has never quite told you what kind of being you're watching. Walk that thought down the corridor into the classroom, and you find the long shadow the school staff cast across the show without ever sitting at the center of an episode in any really resolving way. The principal of Elmore Junior High is, depending on which episode you ask, a baboon and a tyrant, and a sad, lonely man with a hopeless infatuation that the show never really lets him win. The kid's teacher is, by most accounts, an extraordinarily old primate, whose temper the show treats with both affection and a kind of unflinching honesty about how tired she is. The gym coach is one of the show's stranger character designs, a figure whose shape barely seems to hold together. The other teachers, the lunch lady, the janitor, the bus driver who is also half the other jobs in town, all of these are characters the show is content to use for jokes and never quite let breathe. And yet, across the run, the show keeps planting little seeds about their interior lives that it does not water. There is an episode where the teacher's age and origin are gestured at, and the implication is that she is, biologically, prehistorically, old, and the show does nothing further with that. There is an episode where the principal's home life is briefly visible, and what you see is bleaker than the jokes around him would suggest, and the show moves on. There is the recurring suggestion that the school itself is a kind of holding pen, that the staff are also trapped there, that the building eats time. None of these threads are pulled. They are simply there, in the way that something can be in a show and never be confirmed. And they are, taken together, one of the strangest collective unanswered questions in the run, which is the question of who is actually running the place the kids go every day and what it costs them. The wall between those kids and the people watching is not really a wall in this show, and the very specific way the show treats it deserves a long look. The Amazing World of Gumball breaks the fourth wall constantly. Gumball talks to the camera. Darwin talks to the camera. Side characters acknowledge that they are in a show, an animation, a program of some kind. The show does this so often that it stops feeling like a gimmick and starts feeling like the texture of the world. What is strange is that the show treats the fourth wall as porous in only one direction. The characters can see out. The audience does not, in any meaningful sense, see in. Gumball can look at the camera and ask the audience a question, and the show treats the silence on our side as an answer he can interpret. He can tell you gently that he knows you are there. He cannot, however, ever come through to find you. The implication is that the camera is a window the characters can look through but not climb out of. That is, in its way, one of the more frightening framings the show ever offers. The characters know there is a world beyond the one they are in. They know they are being watched. They cannot reach the watchers. And they keep going about their days. The show treats this calmly, almost cheerfully, because the alternative would be a different kind of program entirely. Read in the gentlest way. The fourth wall in this show is a small, warm understanding between the characters and the audience, a wink between friends. Read in the harshest way. The show is letting you watch a cast of people who know they are in a cage and have decided to be funny about it. Either reading is supported by the run, the show never picks. It only lets the wall flicker every few episodes and trusts you to notice that some of the characters keep looking at you, calmly, even when nothing is happening. Threaded through that flicker is Mr. Small, the school counselor, and the long, patient way the show uses him to point at something it cannot quite say out loud. Mr. Small is, on paper, a parody of every well-meaning, vaguely spiritual, deeply impractical adult who has ever tried to mentor a teenager. He talks about energy. He talks about chakras. He talks about the universe in tones that the show clearly intends to be a little ridiculous. And yet, across the run, the show keeps quietly handing him the right answer in episodes where the right answer should be impossible. He will say something on his way past a scene that, taken seriously, would explain what is actually happening in the world. He will see things the other characters miss. He will, in moments of real crisis, behave less like a foolish counselor and more like someone with access to a level of the world the show does not normally let its characters see. The show treats this as a quiet joke, the kind of joke where the audience and the writers and one specific character are all in on it together, and where the character himself has no idea. The implication, never confirmed, is that Mr. Small is the show's way of admitting that the universe of Elmore really is the strange, fragile, made-up thing it appears to be, and that some of its inhabitants can feel that more clearly than others, and that the show finds it funny to put that knowledge in the head of the person nobody listens to. The show never sits him down for a confessional. It never gives him an episode where his readings are confirmed. It never tells you, in plain language, that he is right. It only keeps letting him be right, in passing, in the background, while the louder characters laugh at him. He is, by some quiet count, the show's most reliable signal that something is going on under the surface, and the show, in its patient way, has chosen to never quite acknowledge that he is. Among the small obligations the show drops into the background and forgets, one stands out, because it grew. There is the DVD, and the question of where the family was actually going at the end of the longest, unfinished sentence the show has ever told. Across the run, there is a long, quiet, running joke about a DVD the family rented and never returned, a small obligation that floats in and out of the background, the kind of detail a show drops in to make a family feel real. In the last stretch of the run, the show begins to use the DVD as a different kind of thing. It becomes a quest. It becomes a reason the family's on the road. It becomes, by some readings, a way for the show to put the Wattersons in motion towards an ending it could not quite write yet. The show, as the run paused, did not finish that journey. The DVD was not returned. The destination was not reached. Whatever the show was going to do with that small, dumb errand, it did not get to do it on the schedule it had. Fans have read this in 1,000 ways. Some treat the unreturned DVD as a metaphor for the unfinished show itself. Some treat it as a quiet promise that the family would, one day, complete the loop. Some treat it as the show admitting that all of the things you have grown to love about the Wattersons are unfinished in the same way. By design. None of those readings are confirmed. What is confirmed is that the show set up a goal it never reached and that the audience has been holding on to that small, undelivered errand for years, and that the show, as far as it ever went, never let the family bring the disc home. Then, there is the way the show looks at all, which is one of the most distinctive in modern television. and which is hiding more secrets in plain sight than any other element of the production. The Wattersons are flat, brightly colored, hand-drawn figures. The backgrounds in the vast majority of scenes are photographs. Real streets, real skies, real lawns, real classrooms. The show takes photographs of locations, by most accounts in the United Kingdom, and paints them over and lays its characters on top. The effect on a first watch is just a charming aesthetic choice. On any rewatch, it becomes something stranger. The Wattersons live in a world that is, in a technical sense, real, in the sense that the surface of it is recorded from the actual world, and the people are the only things in it that are drawn. The fans of the show have spent years walking the streets that appear in the backgrounds and identifying the houses and the bridges and the playgrounds, and the show has never quite acknowledged this. It has never made a joke, in show, about the fact that the characters live in a place that is, photographically, recognizable from a particular set of British locations. It has never explained why those streets are the ones whose surfaces it borrows. It has only used those streets calmly, episode after episode, and let the audience figure out what to do with that. The interpretation, the obvious one, is that the writers chose this style because they liked the contrast, because flat cartoon characters look strange against real surfaces, because the gap between the photograph and the drawing is funny. The deeper interpretation, the one the show flirts with in its self-aware moments, is that the Wattersons exist inside a real place, in some sense, and that the strange flicker between mediums you see across the show is the show admitting that its inhabitants are aware of where they live. None of that is confirmed. What is confirmed is that the show, in its very art, is doing something unusual, and that the audience is encouraged to notice without ever being told what to do with the noticing. Behind the visuals, there is the voice acting, and the long, careful way the show handled, and did not always explain, the changes in its own cast. Gumball, the title character, has been voiced by several different actors across the run, because the original cast was made up of children, and children grow. This is, on paper, a normal animation industry reality. What the show did with it, however, is quieter and stranger. There are episodes that quietly comment on the voice change, that have Gumball acknowledge that his voice sounds different, that play with the idea that he is not quite the same person he was a season ago. There is an episode in which the show, openly, pokes fun at the fact that the cast keeps shifting under it, and treats the changing voice as evidence that the world is less stable than its characters pretend. The show has never explained, in any depth, how it wants you to understand those continuity choices. It has never told you whether you should imagine the Wattersons as the same family across seasons, with a slightly different sound, or as something more fluid than that. It has let the voices change, and it has let the characters notice. And it has, in the way of every secret on this list, refused to tell you what to do with that. Some of the actors who voiced Gumball or Darwin during the run are now adults with careers of their own, and the show, by aging into a thing they have grown past, has, in a small way, become part of their childhoods. That fact is not a theory. That fact is the show quietly, sitting in time the way every long-running animation does. What the show never explains, however, is whether it wants you to take that fact seriously inside the world of Elmore, or whether you are supposed to leave it at the edge of the production. The interpretation is yours. The fact is that the people speaking in the Watterson living room are not always, technically, the same people, and the show is the rare animation that has been willing, even occasionally, to make that part of the story. Sitting above the whole production is the long, quiet ending. The show never got to write for its original run. The Amazing World of Gumball ended its main run in the middle of an unfinished arc, with hints of larger stories planted across several seasons, with Rob still walking around, with the DVD undelivered, with the void still humming behind the walls of the world. Fans, at the time, did not know that the show was over. The network did not, for a long stretch, communicate what the future of the show would be. There were rumors about a continuation. There were rumors about a film. There were rumors about a streaming home. None of those rumors, for a very long time, became confirmed news, and the show sat in a kind of indefinite pause, with its cast scattered, with its writers moved to other projects, with the door not closed but very much not open. The show itself, in its final episodes of that run, did not behave as if it were ending. There was no farewell. There was no big door slamming sequence. There was, instead, the texture of a show that thought it had more time, and was acting accordingly. What the show never explained because it could not, is what the final planned arc was. The writers and the show creator have, in interviews, talked in vague terms about where they had wanted to go. They have not, however, walked the audience through it scene by scene. The audience has been left with the show as it stands, with a stack of half-resolved arcs and unanswered questions, and with the knowledge that the original plan, whatever it was, never quite made it to the screen in those original 6 seasons. As far as has been publicly stated since, a continuation has been discussed and at points announced, and a film and further episodes have been talked about by the people who would make them. The original run, taken on its own, however, is the show that was paused, and within that frame the arcs sit where they sat. Out beyond the camera there is the question of what happens to the world of Elmore when nobody is watching. The show flirts with this in a handful of episodes that take place when Gumball is asleep, or when the family is away, or when the camera lingers on a corner of the world the main cast has left. In those moments, the show occasionally lets the background characters have small, strange interior lives that the main story has not made room for. There is a sense, in those moments, that the world has more in it than the show is generally interested in showing you. There are quiet implications that things keep happening when the camera is not looking. There is, in particular, a recurring suggestion that the Wattersons are not the most important family in Elmore, that there is another household, another set of people, another whole rhythm of life going on in parallel, and the show is content to follow only one part of it. The show never tells you what is going on in those other corners. It only gestures, occasionally in their direction, and trusts you to feel the size of the world. Read kindly. This is the show being generous, telling you that life is happening everywhere even when the show is focused on one family. Read more strangely. It is the show admitting that the cast you know is a small slice of a larger structure it has not had time to draw. Either way, the question of what Elmore looks like off camera is one the show set up and never quite closed, and the answer, by definition, is something the show has chosen to keep to itself. Each time you sit down to watch, the opening title sequence plays, and it too has been hiding things in plain sight for years. The opening for most of the show is a quick, joyful montage of the family and the town, set to the same bright theme music, with the characters running through their lives in flashes that change a little, season to season. What fans have noticed slowly, over the course of those changes, is that the opening is not a static thing. It picks up new characters as they enter the show. It quietly drops characters who have receded. There are versions of the opening in which a particular figure stands in a particular shop, and later, versions in which that figure is gone. There are versions in which the family looks slightly different, in which the color palette has shifted, in which a single second of footage has been swapped out for another second. The show has never made a big point of this. It has simply changed the title sequence quietly, the way every long-running show does, and trusted the audience to notice or not. What is strange about the way this show does it is the way each version of the opening feels, in retrospect, like a small snapshot of what the show was at the moment it was made. There is an opening that is unmistakably the early seasons, hopeful and a little awkward, with the family still finding its rhythm. There is an opening that is unmistakably the middle run, confident and dense and a little chaotic. There is an opening from the later seasons in which something almost imperceptible has changed in the way the characters move, in the way they look at the camera, in the way the theme music sits over them. And that opening, watched after the fact, feels a little like a goodbye nobody knew was a goodbye. The show has not in any direct way told you that any of this is on purpose. The interpretation, the warm one, is that this is just what happens to a long-running show. The fact is that the opening has been quietly storing every version of itself as the show has moved through time. And that, lined up together, the openings form a record of what the show was and what it was about to become. And that the show has never quite told you whether you are supposed to use them that way. Step further out, and you arrive at the cosmology of Elmore, and the strange off-center place the show holds for the larger universe its characters live in. There are episodes in which the show takes the family to space, and there are episodes in which the show takes the family back in time, and there are episodes in which the show takes the family into a fully alternate version of their own lives. The show is comfortable with travel of every kind. It is, however, very careful never to give you a stable picture of what those realms look like or how they connect. There is no consistent map of the universe the family inhabits. There is no consistent picture of how time flows. There is no consistent rule about which versions of the family in alternate timelines are real, and which are dreams, and which are simulations. The show plays the largest possible games with its own reality and never, in any one episode, commits to a frame. The implication, if you look at all of it together, is that Elmore exists inside a much larger and stranger structure, and the show is content to flirt with that structure and never name it. There are episodes that gesture at multiple universes. There are episodes that gesture at parallel lives. There are episodes that gesture at the way a single decision can produce a slightly different family in a slightly different house, and the show treats those alternate Wattersons with a kind of weary recognition, as if it has met them before and will meet them again. None of this is confirmed in any structured way. There is no scene where a character explains what the cosmology is. There is no scene where the rules of the universe are written down. There are only the episodes taken together, painting a picture of a world in which travel between realms is possible and easy, and in which nobody quite knows where the doors lead. The interpretation, again, is yours. The fact is that the show has produced more cosmological hints than almost any other half-hour comedy of its era, and has refused with great care to explain any of them. Back inside the school, the classroom around Gumball is a whole social ecosystem the show built without ever quite turning the camera on it. The class at Elmore Junior High is, episode by episode, populated by a wide cast of children that the show treats with great care, and that the show, with equal care, almost never centers. There is Banana Joe, a literal banana with a sense of humor and a deeply lonely streak. There is Tobias, a small rainbow-colored creature with a sister whose name and life the show has built whole episodes around. There is Carmen, a cactus, who is shown to be in a long, quiet relationship with another character, and whose interior life the show occasionally hints at without ever resolving. There is Bobbert, a robot whose origin the show plays with and never explains. There is Susie, a strange, drawn, jaw-shaped child whose voice is unmistakable and whose family life and species the show never really clarifies. There is Anton, by most accounts a piece of bread, who has been shown to die and come back many times across the run, and whose relationship to mortality the show treats as a joke and refuses to take seriously. Each of these children, by the end of the run, has had at least one episode in which the show appeared to be building up to a bigger story for them. None of those bigger stories were ever finished. The show kept moving on, kept centering the Wattersons, kept treating the rest of the class as a richly populated background. What the show never explains is what the school day looks like from any of those other angles. It never gives you, in any complete form, the answer to the question of what these children's homes look like, what their parents are like, what their fears are. It gives you flashes in episodes and then closes them. The argument the show seems to be making is that any one of these children could be a main character in a different version of the show, and that the choice to keep the camera on Gumball is, in some quiet way, arbitrary. The fact is that there are at least a dozen unfinished spin-offs sitting in the wings of this show, and the show has not let you watch any of them. Of those background children, Banana Joe deserves a paragraph of his own, because of all of them, his is the strangest treatment. He is, on his surface, a one-note joke. He is a banana. He makes terrible jokes. The other characters mostly tolerate him. The show, however, keeps returning to him in moments where it wants to make a point about loneliness and persistence. There are episodes in which Banana Joe is shown to be deeply isolated. There are episodes in which his father, by most accounts another banana, is shown to be in a fragile state, with the family having to handle decisions about him that the show treats with surprising tenderness. There are episodes in which Banana Joe quietly behaves like the only character in a scene who understands the gravity of what is happening. The show is doing something with him that it never explains in plain language. It is, in scattered moments, suggesting that the funniest character in the class is the one most aware of how fragile the world is, and that he keeps making bad jokes because the alternative is a kind of stillness he cannot afford. The show never sits Banana Joe down and lets him say any of this. The show only keeps planting the pieces, in episodes that are nominally about something else, and trusting the audience to notice. The interpretation is one of the most generous readings the show ever rewards. The fact is that one of the most easily dismissed characters in the show carries some of its most carefully constructed quiet pain, and the show has chosen never to make that explicit. Among all of those quiet weights, death moves through the show in a careful sideways way that other children's shows refuse to talk about at all. Death in Elmore is a strange thing. Some characters die and come back the next episode. Some characters die and are quietly mourned. Some characters are dead before the show starts and exist as ghosts. The show never gives you a unified rule. It treats death the way the rest of life works in Elmore, as a thing that follows its own logic from episode to episode, with the rules bending around what the story needs. What is striking on close watch is how often the show actually sits with grief. There are episodes that show you a character who has lost a parent, and the show gives the grief room. There are episodes that show you the way a long bereavement can shape a person, and the show treats it with more care than the surrounding jokes. There are scenes that linger on small, ordinary objects belonging to people who are no longer there, and the show lets the camera sit on them. The show, by some quiet count, has more grief in it than any half-hour comedy of its era. What it never explains is the rule, why some characters come back and some do not, why some deaths are jokes and some are real, why the world is willing to break its own logic for some losses and not others. The interpretation, the kindest one, is that the show is making an argument about how grief actually works in a life, that some losses bend you and some do not, that the rule is not about the death but about the person who is left to carry it. The fact is that the show has set up one of the most carefully felt accounts of death in modern animation without ever telling you what the rules are, and that the rules, by their absence, are part of the secret. Time itself does something strange in this show, and refuses to move in any consistent direction across the run. The Wattersons, for most of the show, do not age. Gumball is in roughly the same year of school in the first episode as he is in the last. Anais is in roughly the same grade. Darwin is in roughly the same year. The kids, by sitcom convention, are frozen in place. This is not unusual for an animation. What is unusual is the way the show keeps drawing your attention to it, with episodes that explicitly reference how long they have been the ages they are, with jokes about how the same things keep happening to the same people, with moments in which a character looks at their own life and notices, quietly, that it has not moved. The show plays with this in episodes that show you possible futures, in which the family has grown up, in which Gumball is an adult, in which Anais is a grown woman, in which Darwin is a fish in late middle age. Those futures are usually shown as warnings, or as dreams, or as alternate timelines, and the show is careful never to confirm any one of them as the canonical future of the family. The result, by the end of the run, is that you have seen more possible futures for the Wattersons than for almost any other family in modern animation, and you do not know which one of them is real. The interpretation is interesting. The show seems to be arguing that a family in midlife is, in some sense, a cloud of possible futures, and that any of those futures could become the one that arrives, and that the family is shaped every day by the futures it is not choosing. The fact is that the show has shown you a dozen different versions of where the Wattersons are going, and that none of them have been confirmed, and that the show as it currently stands has not let any of them become the real one. Next door to the Wattersons lives a man with a face that has long stopped expecting kindness, and the very specific relationship he has with Gumball that the show never quite resolves. Mr. Robinson is a mustached, balding figure with the patience of someone who has long since stopped expecting the world to leave him alone. He has a wife, he has a small garden. He has a job hosting a children's television program inside the world of the show, which is one of the show's deeper jokes, because it makes him a fictional entertainer inside a fiction. And the show treats his hatred of children, particularly Gumball, as ironic at first and then, very slowly, as something heavier than that. Gumball, for his part, is openly devoted to Mr. Robinson. He sees him as a mentor. He turns up at his door at all hours. He pours an embarrassing amount of love at a man who clearly does not want it. The show plays this for comedy for years, and then quietly lets you see the other side of it, in episodes that show Mr. Robinson genuinely affected by Gumball's loyalty, in episodes that let him admit, in moments he would never repeat sober, that he is moved by being chosen. The show never explains why Gumball loves him so much. It never explains why Mr. Robinson, of all the adults in the town, is the one Gumball wants attention from. It only lets the relationship sit, episode by episode, and trusts you to feel that what is happening between these two is one of the show's strangest and most genuine ongoing stories. The interpretation, the kindest one, is that Gumball is a child looking for a particular kind of adult attention, and that Mr. Robinson is the adult who happens to be most resistant to it, which makes his attention, when it is given, the most valuable. The fact is that the show built one of its most precise long arcs around this relationship and never wrote you the scene where it gets named. A few seats down from Gumball in class is Susie, the chin-shaped girl whose voice is unmistakable and whose interior life the show treats with a strange, careful blankness. Susie talks. She is in scenes. She has a family. She has, in one notable episode, been the romantic focus of an entire plot. The show does not tell you what she is. Her design is a hand puppet, or a face, or an abstract drawn shape that the show simply treats as a child without explanation. Her voice is unmistakable. Her presence in any scene is felt. The show seems to be daring you to ask what she is and then refusing gently to answer. She is, in some ways, the show's clearest argument for the idea that nothing in Elmore needs to be biologically consistent for it to be loved. The fact is that one of the recurring children in the cast has no defined species, no defined parents in any sustained way, and no defined backstory, and that the show, for many seasons, was perfectly content to let her live in the corner of the classroom and laugh at the same things that others laugh at, and to treat her, in every scene, as part of the world. The implication is gentle. Some characters do not require explanation. The show, however, never told you whether this is supposed to be a comfort or a clue. Beside Susie sits Bober, the robot child, and the buried question of what he actually is. Bobert is, on his surface, a small, simple robot. He is the kind of robot a writer's room invents when they need a child whose responses to the world are slightly off. The show, however, keeps planting moments in which Bober is something larger and stranger. There are episodes in which his processing power, when the show plays with it, is shown to be vast. There are episodes in which his behavior is genuinely uncanny. There are episodes in which the show, very gently, suggests that he is far more capable than he is allowing himself to seem, and that the small, polite version of Bober, who shows up in class every day, is a kind of mask. The show never tells you what is underneath that mask. It never tells you who built him. It never tells you whether he is connected to a larger network of machines in the town. It only lets him sit at his desk in scene after scene and produce the occasional disquieting line. The interpretation, the cooler one, is that Bobert is the show's joke about every robot in every other show. The polite, helpful, eventually frightening machine in a child's body. The fact is that the show set up that joke and never closed it, and that Bobert, in the universe of Elmore, is one of the few characters whose unanswered questions feel almost actively unsafe. Further back along the family tree, on both sides, the show carved out small, precise episodes for the Watterson grandparents and then let them recede. Nicole's parents are shown to be cold, controlled cats with high expectations and a long history of disapproving of their daughter's choices. The show gives them a key episode and then largely retires them, with occasional appearances. Richard's mother, Granny Jojo, is shown to be a complicated, smothering, deeply affectionate woman, whose love for her son is so total that it has, in some sense, made it harder for him to grow into his own life. The show gives her several episodes and treats her with a kind of clear-eyed warmth, and lets her say things to Richard that the audience has been hoping to hear for years. None of these grandparent stories are fully resolved. The show plants the seed and waters it once and walks away. There is no episode in which all four grandparents, or what is left of them, sit at a table together. There is no episode in which the family tree is laid out, for you in full. There are only the visits, the dinners, the arguments, and then the show moving on, with the grandparents remaining as occasional anchors, and never as a sustained plot. The interpretation, the warm one, is that this is how grandparents actually work in most families. That they are part of life in concentrated bursts and then they are not. And that the show is honoring the actual rhythm of intergenerational time. The fact is that the show set up two whole families behind the Watterson household and never quite let you walk through them. And the question of who else is in the tree and where they are and what they think is one of the show's largest unfinished sentences. Around the Wattersons, the wider population of Elmore is denser than almost any town in modern animation, and the show has never given you a registry of who lives in it. There are characters in the show whose names you learn only in a single episode. There are characters who appear in dozens of crowd scenes without ever being named. There are characters who are clearly meant to be specific people, with specific relationships to other characters, with specific places in town, and whose stories the show has never opened. The wiki for the show has, over the years, become a kind of independent project of cataloging all of them, and the fans who maintain it have been able to identify and name, in some cases, characters who appeared in a single second of a single episode. The show itself has never confirmed any of this work. It has simply kept making the show, with these background figures filling in the world, and let the audience do the work of putting names to them. The implication, the gentle one, is that this is how a town actually works, that you would not know the names of most of the people in your own neighborhood, and that the show is being honest about that. The fact is that the show built one of the most densely populated towns in animation and refused, in show, to ever introduce you to most of its citizens. And the question of who all those people are is one of the show's quietest open mysteries. Around the edges of the show, there is also its relationship with its own product placement and brand presence, which is to say not at all in the usual sense, and very carefully in a different sense. The show, across the run, makes jokes about advertising. It makes jokes about brands. It makes jokes about the way the world tries to sell itself to children. It does this from inside a network that is, of course, a brand itself, on a channel that is, of course, paid for by advertisers, with merchandise that is, of course, sold to children. The show is openly aware of this contradiction. It builds episodes around it. It sometimes mocks itself, and it never, in any episode, gives you a clean account of what it actually thinks about being a product. There are episodes in which Gumball talks directly about being merchandised. There are episodes in which the family interacts with fictional companies whose practices are, on close inspection, the same practices the show is part of. There are episodes that gesture at the way modern television is a structure for selling things, and the show seems, in those moments, almost embarrassed. None of this is resolved. The show never tells you whether it thinks it is itself, ultimately, a thing being sold. It only keeps making the joke from inside the joke, and lets you decide whether the joke is at the show's expense or at yours. The fact is that the show has done some of the most pointed self-critique in modern television about being a commercial product, and that the show, by the nature of being a product, could never quite close the argument it started. Tied to that is the way the show treats the internet, and the version of the world it has built for the parts of life that happen on screens. The Wattersons interact with the internet across the run, and the show has invented entire networks, websites, and platforms within its universe to let them do that. There is the version of social media the show uses. There is the version of streaming the show uses. There is, in particular, a recurring set of pieces that suggest the world of Elmore has a parallel digital world that is, in some sense, a kind of underlayer to the town itself. The show has played with this without ever giving you the full architecture. It has, in episodes, taken characters into the digital version of the town. It has, in episodes, treated phones and screens as if they were portals to other planes of being. It has, in episodes, suggested that the figures inside those screens are not always representations of real things, but real things in their own right. None of this is mapped. The show never gives you, in one episode, the rules of how the digital and physical Elmores connect. It only keeps moving between them and lets you feel that the world is bigger than the streets you can see. The interpretation, the warm one, is that this is the show being honest about how modern life works, how most of us live across screens as much as we live in rooms. The fact is that the show set up a digital version of its world and never quite explained where it lives, and the question of what happens on the other side of the screen is, in the universe of Elmore, one of the strangest open ones. Under everything else there is the music, and the careful, often unnoticed work the score and the songs are doing beneath the surface. The Amazing World of Gumball has had, across the run, a remarkable approach to music. The theme tune is short, jaunty, and almost militantly cheerful. The episode scoring, however, is something else. A strange, restless, often deeply melancholic body of work, that reaches for a register most half-hour comedies do not. There are episodes in which the score does the emotional heavy lifting while the writing stays inside its joke rhythm. There are episodes in which the score is openly mournful, sitting under scenes that in another show would have been quietly cheerful. There are scattered songs across the run sung by characters that the show treats with a strange care, as if the music itself were one of the only places certain characters were allowed to say what they meant. The show never explains in any direct way why it is doing this. It never gives you a metatextual scene in which a character points at the score and asks what it is for. It only keeps using music to say what the dialogue cannot. The interpretation is one of the show's most generous gifts. Some feelings in Elmore can only be carried by sound. The fact is that the show has built one of the most carefully scored half-hour comedies of its era and has never, in any direct way, told you that you are listening to one of its most important storytellers. Behind all of that craft is the show's relationship with its own production schedule, and the strange, careful way the run is paced. There are seasons in which the show appears to be racing to fit in everything it wanted to do. There are seasons in which the show appears to be moving slowly, as if it knows it has time. There are stretches of episodes that feel as if they were made under enormous pressure, with the writers and the animators trying to outrun a deadline that the audience cannot see. The show, for the most part, hides this work. It never breaks the surface to talk about how it is being made. There are, however, occasional episodes that are quietly about the work of making the show. Episodes that seem to have been written in moments of exhaustion. Episodes that take obvious shortcuts and use those shortcuts as the joke. The audience watching at home is not usually told what is going on behind the camera. The fans, looking back across the run, can identify the patches where something is clearly off about the production rhythm, where the color is slightly different, where the timing is slightly different, where the show seems to be quietly admitting it had a hard week. The show, however, never lifts the curtain. It only keeps moving. The interpretation is interesting. The show is making, in those moments, a quiet argument about the nature of any long-running creative work, that it is always being made by tired people, and that the things you love are sometimes the things they made on the worst day. The fact is that the show has hidden, across its run, a kind of record of its own making, and the answer to the question of what was happening on any given week is something the show has never explained. Once, on a daring afternoon, the family meets the universe with a capital letter, a character the show introduces and then quietly does not return to in any sustained way. The universe, in this show, is not a metaphor, it is a character. It appears in the relevant episode as a figure who can be talked to, who has opinions, who responds to the family's requests with a kind of cosmic exasperation. The show treats the encounter as if it were a normal thing to happen in a child's day. After the encounter, the universe largely disappears from the show. There is no follow-up. There is no second episode. There is no sustained arc. The implication is that the family has had, in one quiet episode, an audience with the actual force that runs their reality, and that the show then chose, calmly, to never come back to that. The interpretation is one of the strangest the show offers. The universe is real in this world, and it is approachable, and it is, for the most part, indifferent. The fact is that the show set up the largest possible meeting it could ever stage and then walked away from it. And the question of what the universe thinks of the Wattersons is, by the end of the run, an open one. Closer to the pillow there is the recurring use of dreams, and the way the show treats them as a kind of bleed through from places that might be more real than the dreamer knows. There are episodes in which a character dreams and the show takes you inside the dream. And the dream is, recognizably, a dream, with a kind of jumbled internal logic dreams have. There are also episodes in which the dream begins to behave in ways that the dreamer should not know about, in which the dream contains information from outside the dreamer's life, in which the dream knows things the show has not yet told you. The show plays with this without quite confirming what it is doing. The implication is that some dreams in Elmore are not just dreams, that the world of the show has thin spots where the dreamer can see into other parts of the structure, and that the characters are sometimes receiving messages they do not know how to read. The show never sits any character down and lets them work this out. It only keeps planting dreams that feel, on close watch, like more than dreams. The fact is that the show has used dream sequences as one of its quieter ways of telling you that the rules of Elmore are not the rules they appear to be, and that the question of what the dreams actually are is one the show has not answered. Next to those dreams is the show's careful, recurring use of doors, and the very specific way it treats them as objects of more weight than the surrounding scenes suggest. The show has, across the run, given enormous attention to doors. There are episodes in which a door leads somewhere it should not. There are episodes in which a door has been put in a wall as a kind of warning. There are episodes in which a door, opened, briefly reveals a place that should not exist, and the door is closed again, and the show does not return to the topic. The implication is that the world of Elmore has, in addition to its main rooms, a number of small, badly explained side rooms, and that some of those side rooms contain things that the show is not going to walk you into. There are doors in the Watterson house that you have never been shown the other side of. There are doors in the school that the show has used once and then never opened again. There are doors in shops and offices and basements that, the more you look at them, seem to be there to remind you that the world is not a sealed box. The show never makes a big point of any of this. It only keeps drawing doors and trusting you to feel the weight of them. The fact is that the world of Elmore has more doors than the show has time to open, and the question of where each of them goes is, in some quiet count, one of the show's most patient, unanswered ones. Hung beside those doors are the mirrors, and the way the show, in particular, treats reflections as moments of mild danger. There are episodes in which a character looks into a mirror and sees something that is almost themselves, and not quite. There are episodes in which a reflection moves a fraction of a second after the person it is reflecting. There are episodes in which a reflection appears to know something the person in front of it does not. The show, in line with its larger approach, does not make a single explicit story about this. It only keeps doing it in passing in small visual moments that are easy to miss on first watch and harder to ignore on the second. The implication is that the world of Elmore has, in addition to its surface, a kind of silver layer just behind it, and that what lives in that layer is mostly content not to bother anyone, and that occasionally it looks back. The show never confirms this. It only flickers. The fact is that the show has used mirrors as one of its quietest, ongoing visual hints, and the question of what is on the other side of the glass is one of the secrets the show has chosen to keep. Stacked on a shelf nearby is the photograph album, and the strange thing the show does with the family's record of itself. There are episodes in which the Wattersons pull out a photo album and start narrating their lives back to themselves. And the show, with each turn of the page, lets the audience see snapshots of moments that have never been on screen. Holidays that the show never showed you. Birthdays that the show never built an episode around. Smaller, more ordinary days that the show has not had time for. The implication, the warm one, is that the family has had a whole life that you have only watched part of, and the album is a small acknowledgement of all the time you do not have. The implication, the stranger one, is that the album, in some sense, is more real than the show, that the moments inside it are not just storyboarding, but glimpses of a longer continuity that the show is, week by week, only partly catching. The show never tells you which reading to take. It only keeps the album in the cupboard. The fact is that the Wattersons appear to have decades of family history that the show has not adapted. And the question of what is in the rest of that album is, by definition, something the show has chosen to leave between the pages. Out past the suburbs, in a house too small for him, is Hector, the gentle giant in the woods, and the very specific way the show treats his existence. Hector is, by some quiet count, one of the largest characters in modern animation. He is the size of a mountain. He lives in a house too small for him, with a mother who has spent his entire life pretending that he is normal-sized. The show plays this for jokes, mostly, but it keeps coming back to it, in episodes that take Hector's situation seriously. There are episodes in which the show suggests that he is dangerous. There are episodes in which he is shown to be, at his core, a frightened child in a body the world cannot quite accommodate. There are episodes that suggest that if he ever lost his temper, in a real and sustained way, the town would not survive it. And the show treats that as a quiet fact, not as a threat. What the show never quite explains is what he is. The implication is that he is some kind of magical creature, possibly hidden by his mother from a world that does not want him in it. possibly the product of a long bloodline she has spent her whole life concealing. None of that is spelled out. The show only keeps letting Hector be in the world, in his small house with his impossible kindness, and trusts you to feel how fragile his arrangement is. The fact is that the show has built one of its most tender characters around a question of origin that it has never quite answered. Back in the bright corner of the class, there is Tobias's family, and the strange wealth gap the show planted there, and then mostly refused to explain. Tobias, a small rainbow-colored boy, is shown to come from a household that is, by Elmore's standards, very wealthy. His father is a domineering, impatient figure. His mother is a quieter, more weary presence. His older sister is, depending on the episode, either an icon to several of the boys in the class or a person the show is openly empathetic toward. The show plays the wealth as a running joke. It also lets you see, in scattered moments, that Tobias's life is not exactly happy. The expectations are heavy. The atmosphere at home is tense. The siblings are openly competitive with each other. The show never gives you a full Tobias episode. It gives you small windows into his house and lets you see that the kid in the bright clothes is not as cheerful as the surface suggests. None of this is resolved. There is no episode in which Tobias breaks down. There is no episode in which the family changes. There is only the quiet ongoing implication that the loud, bright, rainbow-colored friend at school is going home to a place that is harder than the show has time to walk you through. The fact is that the show set up a portrait of an unhappy, wealthy family in the corner of the cast and never quite let it become a story. In the corner of the Watterson living room sits Mr. Cuddles, a toy that is one of the strangest treatments the show gives to any object. Mr. Cuddles is, on his surface, a worn-looking stuffed animal that lives in the house and is occasionally featured in the background. The show has, on a few separate occasions, suggested very gently that Mr. Cuddles is not entirely inert. There are scenes in which the toy appears to be in a slightly different position than it was a moment ago. There are scenes in which a character glances at it and then quickly looks away. There are episodes in which the show, in passing, treats the toy as if it might be alive in some smaller, sadder way than the rest of the world. The show never makes a single sustained story out of this. It only keeps planting the visual hints. The implication is that the Watterson's house, in addition to its known inhabitants, has at least one other resident, and that the resident is patient and that nobody in the family quite acknowledges it. The interpretation, the gentlest one, is that this is the show doing a small horror joke for the audience who notices. The fact is that the show has, by quiet count, used the toy as one of its most reliable visual signals that the world is not always what it appears, and has never told you what the signal means. In the kitchen, the rules around food are some of the strangest the show is keeping quiet about. The Wattersons eat food. The Wattersons are also living in a town in which a number of their friends and neighbors are, by any reasonable taxonomy, food. There is a banana in the class. There is a piece of bread in the class. There is a hot dog character in the world. There are donuts. There are sentient pieces of fruit. The show has, of course, played with the contradictions of this for years and has built jokes around it. It has, however, never quite told you what the rule is. There is no scene in which a Watterson tries to eat one of the classmates. There is no scene in which the family discusses, in detail, what they will and will not put on the table. There are episodes in which a character that should be food becomes, briefly, the focus of a meal, and the show treats it as a moment of horror or a moment of comedy and moves on. The implication is that the rules of eating, in Elmore, are quietly agreed on by everyone, and that those rules are not entirely consistent, and that the town is, in some sense, structured around the small kindnesses of not asking. The fact is that one of the most basic questions a viewer could ask about this world is, who is on the menu? And the show has not answered it. Upstairs, after the lights go out, the show treats sleep with a curiously porous boundary between waking and the rest of the day. There are episodes in which the family is asleep, and the show takes the camera into their dreams, and the dreams interact with each other in ways that should not be possible. There are episodes in which a character sleepwalks, and the sleepwalk turns into a journey that has its own consequences in the waking day. There are episodes in which the show pauses on the family asleep, in the small hours, and uses the moment to comment on how much of any life is spent unconscious. The show never builds a single sustained story about sleep. It only keeps returning to it, in moments, in fragments, in the way other shows return to a favorite location. The implication is that sleep in Elmore is not just a pause in the day but a kind of separate medium, and that the things that happen there are not entirely separated from the things that happen in the kitchen. The fact is that the show has used the bedroom and the hours of the night as one of its quieter, recurring settings, and the question of what those hours actually are in the structure of the world is one the show has chosen to leave open. At the breakfast table, there is Richard, and the long, careful argument the show is making about what kind of man he is. Richard, on his surface, is the joke father, the unemployed pink rabbit who eats too much and understands too little. The show plays this for laughs constantly. It also, across the run, gives you a different Richard in small, careful episodes. There is the Richard who, in the Origin two-parter, is shown as the boy Nicole fell in love with a sweetness and a vulnerability that the surface version of the character has buried. There is the Richard who, in episodes about his father, becomes a more clearly broken figure, struggling with a kind of inherited absence. There is the Richard who, in episodes about his children, becomes, against the audience's expectations, the parent who actually shows up emotionally in moments when Nicole's competence cannot. The show never writes you a scene in which all of these Richards sit down together. It only keeps using one or the other episode by episode, and trusts you to keep them connected. The implication is that the joke father is a real person, and that the real person is one of the show's most carefully drawn portraits of someone who has been wounded by his childhood and has found, despite that, a kind of love that works. The fact is that Richard is one of the most complicated characters in the show, and the show has chosen never to give you a single episode that sums him up. Beyond the family, the show has a strange, often touching awareness of the age of its audience. The show is, on paper, a children's cartoon on a children's channel. The audience the show has actually accumulated, however, includes a large number of teenagers and adults, many of whom grew up with the show, many of whom found it as adults, many of whom watch it for reasons the original brief did not anticipate. The show, in the later seasons, seems aware of this. There are episodes that include jokes that no child would be expected to catch. There are episodes that play to a kind of nostalgic recognition that would only make sense to viewers who had been with the show for years. There are moments, in particular, in which Gumball speaks directly to the camera in a way that feels, in tone, more like a young adult than a child, and the show seems to be tipping its hat to the older portion of its audience. The show has never explained, in any direct way, how it thinks about who is watching. It has only kept making jokes that work in two registers, and let the audience sort itself. The fact is that this is one of the few children's shows of its era that quietly designed for a dual audience, and the question of how much of the show was, by the end, for the adults watching is, in some ways, one of the most polite open secrets of the run. Across the wider town, the show treats class and money in a way that goes well beyond the Watterson household. There are families in this town that are clearly wealthy. There are families that are clearly poor. There are characters who live in nice houses and characters who live in worse ones. The show, in passing, lets you see the difference and treats it with the same gentle honesty it gives the Watterson's own precarity. It does not, however, build a sustained class story across the run. It does not, in any one episode, give you the architecture of Elmore's economy. It does not tell you who, in the larger sense, the rich people in this town are, or how they got there, or what they think of the people who are not. It only keeps planting moments in which the differences are visible, and trusting you to assemble the picture. The interpretation, the warmest one, is that the show is doing what good comedies do, holding up a mirror to a real economic landscape and letting you see your own neighborhood in it. The fact is that the show has set up a quietly precise critique of class and never let it become the focus of an episode. And the question of who runs Elmore and who does not is one of the secrets the show has not opened. There is a single building in Elmore the show treats with more gravity than any other, and that is the hospital. There are episodes in which the family ends up there, and the show, in those episodes, gives the building a kind of weight it does not give most other settings. There is one episode in particular in which the show, with great patience, walks through the long, ordinary day of waiting for a piece of medical news and treats the hospital itself as a character. The show plays this with restraint. It does not make a big point of it. It only lets the hospital be the kind of place where the show's tone shifts, where the color palette gets slightly muted, where the jokes get a little quieter, where the family becomes more careful with each other. The show never explains in any direct way why this building affects it differently. It only treats the hospital as one of the few places in Elmore that the show is openly afraid of, and lets you feel that. The interpretation is gentle. Hospitals are, for everyone, a different kind of place. The fact is that the show has made a particular building across the run into a kind of soft warning sign, a place where you should expect the rules of the show to bend, and the question of what the show is doing in the hospital scenes is one of its quieter, open ones. Buried inside the origin episode, there is the moment of Gumball's birth, and the small, strange details the show planted there for the audience that watches closely. The episode takes you back through Nicole and Richard's early lives, walks you through their meeting, walks you through Gumball's arrival, and stops short of explaining how a cat and a rabbit produce a slightly different shade of cat. What it does, however, in the small moments around the birth, is plant a few visual cues that fans have spent years discussing. There is a moment in which the camera lingers on a piece of background detail that does not quite fit. There is a moment in which the music is quieter than the surrounding episode suggests. There is a moment in which the show, very gently, makes the birth feel less like a happy accident and more like something the world had been arranging. None of this is named. None of this is confirmed. The show treats the birth as a happy, ordinary fact and lets you keep watching. The interpretation that has accumulated around it is that Gumball is, in some sense, intended to be where he is, that the show has been arranging him into the position he occupies for reasons the surface story does not show. The fact is that the origin episode contains more buried visual hints than almost any other episode in the run, and the question of what they are pointing at has never been answered. That awareness in Gumball himself is the next quiet question, and the slow, careful way the show keeps moving the answer. Gumball, in the early seasons, is presented as a fairly ordinary child who, for plot reasons, occasionally talks to the camera. In the later seasons, Gumball is something else, a child who, in certain episodes, appears to know that he is in a program, who, in certain episodes, appears to be able to manipulate the structure of his own story, who, in certain episodes, looks at the audience with the expression of someone who has worked out what he is. The show never confirms this in a single anchoring scene. It only keeps escalating. By the end of the run, Gumball is one of the most metatextually aware characters in any cartoon of the era, and the show has not given you a single moment in which he says, in plain language, what he understands. The implication is that the show wants you to feel the awareness without letting Gumball name it, because the moment he names it, the show changes. The interpretation is that the show is, in some quiet way, a coming-of-age story about a child working out the structure of the world he lives in, and that the awareness is the growing up. The fact is that the show has built one of its central long arcs out of a character's increasing capacity to see through the surface of his own life, and that the show, by design, has never let him say what he has seen. If Rocky is one of the town's hidden multitasking residents, the other is Larry, the multi-job, deeply tired, blue-skinned figure who manages a remarkable number of the businesses in Elmore. He is at the supermarket. He is at the convenience store. He is at the petrol station. He is at the cinema. He is, on a quiet count, the second person in town who appears to be holding down more jobs than one person should reasonably hold, alongside Rocky and the cumulative cast of long-suffering small business workers. The show treats Larry, however, with a different tone than it gives Rocky. Where Rocky is gentle and a little fogged, Larry is exhausted, sharp, occasionally furious, and openly aware of how much of the town's life is being held together by him. There are episodes in which Larry breaks in small ways, and the show takes those breaks seriously. There are episodes in which Larry argues with the family in a way that is, on close watch, a working-class argument with a customer who does not understand what their convenience is costing him. The show never quite tells you why Larry is the person at all those counters. It only keeps putting him there. The interpretation is that the show is, in Larry, doing its quietest character study about the people whose labor holds up a town. The fact is that one of the most overworked figures in the cast has, across the run, been treated with both comic exasperation and surprising tenderness, and the show has not closed his story. Then there is the show's relationship with its own continuity, and the strange, often funny way it treats the question of what counts as canon inside its own world. There are episodes that explicitly contradict each other. There are episodes that explicitly contradict themselves. There are episodes in which a character suddenly has a job they did not have last week, a friend they did not have last week, a house they did not have last week. The show is openly aware of this. There are episodes in which the family gets a new house and then, in a later episode, is back in the old one. And the show treats the question of which house is real as the kind of thing it does not need to settle. There are episodes in which a character dies, in a way the show treats as permanent, and then appears again the next week without comment. The show has, in scattered episodes, made the inconsistency itself the joke, with characters openly remarking on how confusing their own continuity has become. The implication, the warm one, is that the show is making an argument about how memory actually works, that everyone's life is, in some sense, a stack of slightly contradictory versions, and that the show is just being honest about it. The implication, the stranger one, is that the inconsistencies are themselves evidence that Elmore is not a fixed place, but a rolling rewrite. The show never picks. It only keeps producing episodes and lets the continuity bend around them. A few of those older episodes sit differently now than they did when they aired, and the show, in line with its larger habit, has not stopped to talk about it. There are episodes in the run that, by current standards, would be made differently. There are jokes that have not aged well. There are sequences that, looked at from the present, sit in a different way than they did when they aired. The show, like every long-running animation, contains a record of the time it was made. The show itself has not, in any direct way, acknowledged this. There has been no episode in which the cast turns to the camera and apologizes for something earlier in the run. The audience has, however, watched the show change slowly, in its tone, in its choices, in the kinds of jokes it makes. And it is possible, looking at the run as a whole, to see the show learning, in real time, what it thinks about its own choices. The interpretation, the kindest one, is that the show is, like everyone, in the process of growing up, and that the run, taken end to end, is a record of that growth. The fact is that some early episodes sit in a different place now than they did when they aired, and the show, by design, has not stopped to talk about it. There is also the very specific way the show has, in scattered episodes, suggested that the cartoon you are watching might be, in some sense, finite, and the way it has flirted with the idea of its own ending without ever quite getting to one. There are episodes that play with the idea of the show ending. There are episodes that play with the idea of a character realizing they are running out of time. There are episodes that, in their final beats, look very much like a series finale, and then turn out not to be. The show has, more than once, set up what looks like the last episode and used it as the first half of something else. The implication, in those moments, is that the show is openly thinking about its own ending, and is not afraid to flirt with it, and is also, by some quiet design, refusing to commit to it. The fact is that the show has produced more potential finales than it has actually finished, and that the audience watching across the run has, more than once, sat down expecting a goodbye and received instead a continuation. The question of which of those finales the show would have used if it had known the run was ending is one that the show has not answered. Under that flirtation is the show's quiet, sometimes mournful argument about the impossibility of going back. There are episodes in which a character revisits something from their earlier life and finds it changed. There are episodes in which a character tries to recapture a feeling and cannot. There are episodes in which the show stops for a moment and looks at a place that the family used to spend time in, and treats the small absences as a real loss. The show, by some quiet count, has more episodes about not being able to return than almost any other half-hour comedy of its era. The implication is that the show is, in its quieter moods, openly making an argument about how time works, that you do not get to keep anything, that every period of your life ends before you notice. The fact is that the show, while delivering jokes at a rate that hides this, has been delivering one of the most patient meditations on lost time in modern animation. And the question of why the show is so quietly preoccupied with the impossibility of returning to anything is one of its most felt secrets. Sitting underneath that is love, and in particular, the long, careful arc between Gumball and Penny, which is one of the most quietly drawn romances in modern animation. The show is not afraid to be silly about their relationship. It is not afraid to be sweet about it. It is, however, very careful about what it lets that relationship be. Gumball and Penny across the run navigate first crushes, first confessions, first dates, first arguments, first reconciliations, with a kind of care that most children's shows do not have time for. The show treats their relationship as one of the small structural truths of its world, and lets the supporting cast notice it, and lets the parents commentate on it, and lets it grow at the pace it grows. What the show never tells you, however, is where it ends. There is no episode that gives you the long view. There is no episode in which the relationship is sealed in any final way. There is no episode in which it ends. The show only keeps it going, episode by episode, and lets the audience feel that what they are watching is one of the few stable, growing things in the world. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is honoring a kind of love that does not need an ending. The fact is that the show ran out of time without telling you what happens to Gumball and Penny, and that, in some quiet sense, the unfinished romance is one of the largest secrets the show is sitting on. Down below the kitchen, the basement, is a kind of separate climate inside the same house. The Watterson's basement is, in different episodes, a workshop, a storage space, a laundry, a gym, a workshop again, a slightly different workshop, and in a number of episodes, the place where the show goes when it wants to do its strangest stories. There are episodes in which something has clearly been buried in the basement and is slowly working its way back up. There are episodes in which the basement contains a door that is not the door to the rest of the house. There are episodes in which the basement is treated as a kind of edge of the property, the place where the rules of the family's home get thinner. The show never tells you whether the basement is, in some structural sense, a different place from the rest of the house. It only keeps using it. The fans of the show have spent years cataloging the inconsistencies in what the basement contains and what its layout looks like, and the show has never quite acknowledged the catalog. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the basement is a household joke, the way many real basements are, the place where the family stops keeping their lives organized. The interpretation, the stranger one, is that the basement is the household's connection to the structure underneath the world, the place where the show is admitting that the house sits on top of something. Either reading is supported. The fact is that the basement, by quiet count, is the room the show has used the most for its weirder ideas, and the question of why it is the place those ideas live in is one the show has not opened. Up at the top of the same house, the attic has a slightly different feeling, a room that in most episodes you never see. The Watterson's attic, when the show takes you up there, is shown to be full. There are old objects in it. There are old photographs. There are old toys. There are objects that on close watch seem to belong to people who do not currently live in the house. The show never quite tells you what is in the attic. It only keeps the camera away from it, for the most part, and lets you imagine. The implication is that the family's accumulated past is up there, that the rooms upstairs from the rooms you see are full of things they have not had the energy to deal with, and that in some quiet way the show is making an argument about the way every family carries its history above its head. The fact is that the show, while showing you every other room of the house repeatedly, has, by some careful count, used the attic only when it absolutely had to, and the question of what is up there now and how the family has agreed to live with it is one of the show's quietest unanswered ones. In the smallest pink room in the house, Annie's once had an imaginary friend, and the show wove a strange long thread around the question of whether the smartest child in the household needed someone the show could not see. There are episodes in which Anais is shown to be very young, and is shown to be lonely, and is shown to have, for a stretch, an imagined companion who is, in her view, real. The show treats this with care. It plays it lightly when it needs to be light. It plays it heavily when it needs to be heavy. It does not, however, tell you whether the friend was actually only ever a child's invention, or whether, in the world of Elmore, there was always a chance that the friend was something more. The implication is that the show wants to leave the question open, because the answer the audience picks will say more about them than about Anais. The fact is that the show planted a small mystery about whether one of its central children had access to a presence the rest of the family could not see, and the show, in the way of every other mystery on this list, has chosen never to say. Then there is the way the show treats boredom as a force, almost a character, and the careful way it argues that being bored is one of the most dangerous states a person can be in. There is an episode in which Gumball, faced with an empty afternoon, slowly and methodically works himself into a kind of existential crisis, and the show treats it with the surface tone of a comedy and the underlying tone of a much heavier story. There are episodes in which boredom is the engine that gets the family into trouble. There are episodes in which boredom is presented as the thing the characters are most afraid of, beyond even the more obvious dangers of the town. The show does not, in any one episode, build a thesis statement around this. It only keeps planting episodes in which the worst thing that can happen to a Watterson is nothing at all. The interpretation is interesting. The show seems to be making quietly the argument that boredom is the closest the characters get to noticing that they are inside a structure they cannot escape, and that they filled the time with chaos in order not to have to look at the walls. The fact is that the show has used boredom as a kind of recurring lens on the rest of its themes, and the question of what the characters are actually trying not to feel when they fill the day with noise is one of the secrets the show has not opened. On the other side of the calendar are the holiday episodes, and the strange care the show gives to its rituals of celebration. The show has its own Christmas episodes, its own birthday episodes, its own anniversary episodes, and the show treats each of these with more weight than the usual television holiday outing. There are Christmas episodes that the show has used to tell some of its quietest emotional stories. There are birthday episodes that have been used to show you, in passing, what a character secretly wants from the rest of their life. There are anniversary episodes for the parents that the show has used to lay out, in calm conversation, the small history of their decision to stay together. The show does not, in any one episode, build a single thesis about ritual. It only keeps using the calendar as one of its more reliable engines, the times of year when the family is forced, briefly, to look at itself. The interpretation is gentle. The show is making the argument that holidays are not really about the holidays, that they are the small windows in the year when a family has to acknowledge what it has and what it does not. The fact is that the show has used holidays more carefully than most half-hour comedies of its era, and has not told you in any direct way why those episodes feel different from the rest of the run. Then there is the meta layer, the show's relationship with the idea that it is a cartoon on a network, and the specific, often funny, sometimes sad way it has engaged with the broader business of children's television. There are episodes that play with the conventions of other children's shows. There are episodes that play with the conventions of the network the show is on. There are episodes that play with the conventions of advertising, of marketing, of merchandise. The show has, in some of these episodes, made jokes that look, on close watch, like quiet protests about the conditions of its own production. There are jokes about the way networks treat shows. There are jokes about the way schedules are made. There are jokes about the way some characters, over time, get pushed to the front of the merchandise and others do not. The show never makes a single direct statement. It only keeps planting the jokes and trusts you to feel them. The interpretation is that the show is, in its quieter moments, a self-portrait of a long-running cartoon being aware of how it is being used. The fact is that the show has, by some quiet count, said more about the business it is in than almost any other half-hour comedy of its era, and has chosen never to spell out what it actually thinks. Threaded through that meta layer is the show's recurring interest in the question of what a hero is, and the careful, slightly tired argument it has built across the run about Gumball's relationship with the idea. Gumball is presented, episode by episode, as the closest thing the show has to a protagonist. He is not, however, particularly heroic. He is impulsive. He is selfish. He is, in any number of episodes, the cause of the problem the family then has to solve. The show plays this for jokes constantly. It also, in scattered episodes, lets you see that Gumball knows what he is, and that he is trying, in his own scattered way, to be better, and that he is, slowly, getting closer to it. The show never quite tells you whether he gets there. It only keeps the trajectory moving. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is making the argument that growing up is not a single arc, but a long accumulation of attempts, and that the audience is watching one of those attempts in slow motion. The fact is that the show has built one of its central long arcs around the question of whether a chaotic, well-meaning child can grow into a person who matches the kindness in him, and that the show, by design, has not given you the scene in which the answer is settled. Beside that is the show's quiet, ongoing argument with the rest of its medium, and the way it has, across the run, planted small jokes at the expense of other animated shows, often with great affection. There are episodes that pastiche other styles. There are episodes that treat other genres as targets to be gently teased. There are sequences in which the show, with a remarkable level of craft, recreates the look of other animated productions for a single scene, and then returns to its own house style without comment. The show never quite tells you what it thinks of its peers. It only keeps engaging with them in passing, in scenes that work as jokes whether or not you know the references. The fans, identifying the references, have spent years cataloging them, and the catalogers have, in some cases, identified specific shows being referenced in specific frames, and the show itself has not confirmed most of them. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is a fan of its own medium, that it is honoring the shows that came before it by remixing them, and that the references are a kind of family album. The fact is that the show contains more pastiche than the writers have publicly accounted for, and the question of how many of the references in any given episode are intentional is one the show has chosen to leave open. Underneath the cartoon, of course, is the photographed town the show is built on, and the long, careful way fans have walked the actual streets behind the show. The backgrounds in the show are, for the most part, photographs of real locations in the United Kingdom, recolored and treated and overlaid with the cartoon characters. The show has, in interviews available at various points over the years, openly acknowledged that the backgrounds come from real places, and the fans, over the years, have walked the real streets and identified the bridges and the playgrounds and the corner shops that appear in the show. The show has never built an episode around this. It has never let the family discover that they are living in a real place that was photographed. It has only used the photographs calmly, episode after episode, and lets the real town and the cartoon town quietly become a single hybrid space. The implication, in some readings, is that the show is admitting that all the things it has invented sit on top of a real world that the cartoon is borrowing from. The interpretation, in the warmer reading, is just that this is a clever production technique that has produced one of the most distinctive looks in modern television. The fact is that there are real locations that, in some sense, are also Elmore, and the question of how the show wants you to feel about that overlap is one it has not answered. Out at the town sign, there is the question of who is allowed to leave Elmore. There are episodes in which characters leave the town briefly for plot reasons. There are episodes in which characters threaten to leave the town for good. There are episodes in which characters quietly remark on how few people they know who have actually left. The implication in the careful background of these episodes is that Elmore is a town with a remarkably low rate of exit. The people who grow up there seem, for the most part, to remain. The grandparents who appear are still in the area. The teachers who taught the parents are still teaching the children. The shopkeepers seem to have been at their counters for a very long time. The show treats this as ordinary. It does not in any one episode build a story around why nobody leaves. It only lets you feel the stickiness of the town. The interpretation, the kindest one, is that this is just what small towns are like in any real world, that the people who stay are the people who stay. The interpretation, the stranger one, is that Elmore is a town that does not let people leave, in some quiet structural way that the characters themselves cannot quite name. The show has never picked. The fact is that, across the run, only a handful of characters appear to have actually moved away. And the question of why so few do is, in the universe of Elmore, one of the most patient open ones. Even the channel that hosted it is not safe from the show's gaze. And the strange, often pointed jokes the show has made about the structure of its own home network are worth their own paragraph. The show has, over the years, made references to other shows on the channel, to the channel's branding, to the channel's relationship with its audience. There are episodes that play with the structure of an animation block as if the structure itself were a setting. There are jokes about the way certain shows on the channel rise and fall. There are jokes about the way the channel sometimes treats the children watching as customers. The show has never quite confirmed how seriously it means any of this. It has, however, been more openly engaged with its own home than most shows of its era. The interpretation, the affectionate one, is that the show grew up on the channel and is making the kind of jokes you make about your own family. The interpretation, the more pointed one, is that the show, like every long-running animation, has had to fight for its own survival on a channel that does not always treat its shows kindly, and that some of those jokes are quiet record-keeping. The fact is that the show has, in scattered episodes, said more about its own broadcast home than most shows of its era ever do. And the question of what those jokes were really aimed at is one the show has not answered. Inside the screens the characters look at, there is the larger question of what kind of being the show thinks lives inside our devices. The show has, in scattered episodes, given form to the internet as if it were a character with a face and a personality. The internet, in those episodes, is shown to be a vain, exhausting, occasionally helpful entity. The kind of being you would invite into your house only with the understanding that it would take up most of your time. The show plays this for jokes. It also, in those same episodes, plants a few quietly serious moments in which the internet is shown to be aware of the people who use it, and the people who use it are shown to be aware of how much of their lives they have given it. The show never builds a single sustained thesis around this. It only keeps using the internet as a character, and trusts you to feel the joke. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is making the argument that the things we use, eventually, become characters in our lives. The interpretation, the stranger one, is that the show is, very quietly, suggesting that the internet is a kind of god, in the small specific sense that it knows you and you cannot avoid it. The fact is that the show built one of the more striking characterizations of the internet in modern animation, and the question of how seriously it means it is one of its quieter, open ones. Out in the audience, time has been working on the show too, and the strange and gentle way it has aged into a kind of memory for the people who grew up with it deserves a paragraph of its own. The show went on the air when many of its earliest viewers were very young. Those viewers, by the end of the run, were teenagers or adults. The show, by some quiet count, has become one of the formative texts for a generation of children who are now older. It is referenced in their conversations. It is mentioned in their work. It is, for some of them, the show that was on in the background of an entire stretch of childhood. The show itself has not, in any direct way, acknowledged this. It has only, in its later episodes, allowed a slight tonal change that suggests it knows the kids who started with it are not kids anymore. The interpretation, the gentle one, is that the show is, in those later episodes, leaving a soft farewell to a particular generation of viewers, in the form of jokes that only those viewers will recognize. The fact is that the show has, in passing, written some of its later material for an audience that has aged with it, and the question of how much of the late run is designed for the children who started with it, now adults, is one the show has not opened. Hanging over all of it is the show's relationship with its own potential future, and the very careful way it has handled the announcements of a continuation. At various points across the years, there have been public statements from the production about a film, about new episodes, about a streaming home, about a return. Some of these statements have been more definite than others. Some have been walked back. Some have been quietly forgotten. The show itself, in show, has not commented on any of this. The characters have not, in any episode, acknowledged that they may or may not be returning. The audience has been left for most of the time. The show has been paused, in a kind of held breath. As best as has been publicly stated, there has been ongoing discussion of a continuation in production, with names attached, with promises made. The interpretation, the hopeful one, is that the show is coming back. The fact, within the frame of the original 6-season run, is that the show as it stands is the show that paused, and that the original run, taken on its own, ends where it ends. In its later seasons, the show has also adopted a quietly wistful tone when looking at its own run, and the secret of its legacy hides in those late episodes. There are episodes in the later seasons that play, in their final beats, like quiet acknowledgments of a long run drawing to some kind of close. There are scenes that linger on the family in a way the earlier seasons would have moved past. There are moments that, watched after the fact, feel like the show saying goodbye in soft language before it knew it had to. The show has not in any direct way told you that those scenes were intended as farewells. It has only let them sit and trusted the audience to feel the difference. The interpretation, the warm one, is that any long-running show eventually starts to sound a little like an old friend at the end of a long visit. The fact is that the show, by its end, contained a quiet accumulation of moments that have, in retrospect, the texture of goodbye, and the question of how many of them were intentional is one only the people who made the show could say, and the show itself has been content to keep that to itself. Pulling all of those threads together is the long, careful argument the show has been making about kindness, and the way it has, across the run, quietly become one of the gentlest cartoons of its era despite all the chaos on the surface. There are episodes about cruelty, and the show takes them seriously. There are episodes about exclusion, and the show takes them seriously. There are episodes about loneliness, and the show takes them seriously. The show is, on the surface, a fast-moving, often loud, sometimes manic comedy. Under that, however, it has been, for years, one of the more careful pieces of moral storytelling in modern animation, with episode after episode quietly arguing for a particular kind of patient, ordinary kindness. The show has not, in any direct way, told you this is what it is doing. It has only kept doing it. The fact is that the most consistent thing the show has done across its run is to insist, in small ways, that the characters be a little kinder to each other than the joke would require, and the question of what the show is, at its core, would, if you had to answer it in a single sentence, probably reduce to that. And finally, holding all of those secrets together, there is the largest one of all. The Amazing World of Gumball is a show built end to end on the idea that you can love a thing without being able to explain it. The Wattersons cannot quite explain themselves. The town cannot quite explain itself. The void cannot explain itself. The villain cannot explain himself. The show, episode after episode, has refused to give you a settled account of what it is, and has trusted that you will keep watching anyway, and you have. That refusal is not a failure of the writing. It is, in its way, the writing itself. The show has decided that some things should be felt rather than named, and that the people watching will, with time, build their own accounts. That is why the fan readings of the show are so rich. That is why the wiki the audience has built around it is so deep. That is why the audience, by the end of the run, knows things about Elmore that the show has never put into any one episode. The show set itself up as a thing you would have to finish in your own head, and the audience, faithfully, has been doing that. The largest and quietest fact is that almost every secret on this list is a place where the show stops talking and lets you take over. And the show has, with great care, made the silence part of the gift. There are smaller secrets too that the show has folded into the corners of episodes and never come back for, and they are worth sitting with for a stretch because they form the texture under everything we have just talked about. One of these smaller threads is the recurring sight of objects in the Watterson house that move between episodes without anyone in the family noticing. A picture frame on the wall above the sofa in one episode contains one image. In another, it contains a different image. In a third, the frame is gone, replaced by something else. The show treats this kind of thing as a production detail, the kind of slip that happens in any animation with a long run. It also, every so often, draws your attention to it in the form of a character glancing at a wall and looking briefly confused. The implication, the gentle one, is that this is a wink at the audience about how unstable the visual continuity of long-running shows actually is. The implication, the stranger one, is that the house is being quietly redecorated by something that is not anyone living in it. The show has not picked, and the question of who is changing the pictures on the walls of the Watterson living room is one of those small secrets the show has chosen to keep. Another smaller thread is the recurring use of the family car, and the way the car, across the run, behaves as if it has a slightly different personality from one episode to the next. There are episodes in which the car barely runs. There are episodes in which the car runs perfectly. There are episodes in which the car displays a kind of internal weariness, with sounds and movements that read as if it were a creature with its own moods. The show, in line with its larger habits, never quite tells you whether the car is alive. There are no episodes in which it talks. There are, however, several episodes in which it appears to make decisions, and the family treats those decisions with a kind of tolerant acceptance, as if the car has earned the right to behave the way it behaves. The interpretation, The warm one is that this is the show being honest about how families treat their old cars, with the affectionate fiction that the car has a personality of its own. The interpretation, the stranger one, is that in a world full of sentient objects, the car of course has some kind of inner life, and the family has agreed not to comment on it. The fact is that the show has built the family car into one of its more carefully recurring objects, and the question of what the car is, in the order of beings in Elmore, is one the show has not opened. A further smaller thread is the specific way the show handles the postman, who is, depending on the episode, a different figure each time, sometimes recognizably the same person and sometimes a completely different design. The show plays this as a running gag in some seasons and as a barely noticed continuity quirk in others. The implication is that the postal service in Elmore is, in some quiet way, a constantly shifting profession. The interpretation is that this is the show admitting that some background figures are, by design, interchangeable. The fact is that the figure who brings the post to the Watterson house has, by quiet count, more visual variations across the run than almost any other recurring role. And the question of who is actually carrying the letters is one of the smaller secrets the show has chosen not to settle. Then there is the way the show treats weather, and the strange, often suggestive job the weather is doing across the run. There are episodes in which the weather is extreme in a way that fits the story being told. There are episodes in which the weather is extreme in a way that has nothing to do with the story, and the show seems to be using it to set a mood it does not want to name. There are episodes in which the weather changes mid-scene, and the show plays this as a joke about animation rules. There are also episodes in which the weather changes mid-scene, and the show does not play it as a joke, and a character will look out of a window with an expression of mild alarm. The implication, the careful one, is that the weather in Elmore is not entirely natural, that the sky is, in some quiet sense, reacting to the things happening underneath it, and that the characters have come to expect this. The show has not confirmed this. It has only kept letting the weather behave like a participant. The fact is that the climate of Elmore is one of the show's more inconsistent, ongoing characters, and the question of whether it is alive in any sense is one the show has not picked. Tucked into the last seconds of each episode is the show's relationship with its own credits, and the strange care it has given to that brief tale of the runtime. There are episodes in which the credits play out over a quiet pan across the town, with no dialogue, no music, sting, no incident. There are episodes in which the credits include a small extra scene that the audience can choose to watch or not, depending on whether they remain seated. There are episodes in which the credits, watched carefully, include a small visual joke that is not the main joke of the episode and is, in fact, an entirely separate idea that the show did not have time to make a story out of. The show has not, in any direct way, told you to watch the credits. It has only kept rewarding the audience that does. The fact is that the show contains, across the run, a small library of throwaway material that it has hidden in the corner of episodes for the people who are paying attention. And the question of how much of that material is intentional and how much of it is the show simply being playful is one of the quieter games it has been playing with its audience. Painted underneath every scene is the show's use of specific colors and the very specific job that a few particular shades are doing across the run. There is a pink that the show uses almost only when it wants you to feel something tender. There is a blue that the show uses almost only when it wants you to feel something cold. There is a gray that the show uses almost only when it wants to suggest that something has been hollowed out. The show has not told you in any direct way that the colors are doing this. It has only kept using them consistently, episode after episode, and trusts you to pick up the language. The fact is that the color script of the show is, by some quiet count, more careful than most half-hour comedies of its era ever bother to be, and the question of how much of the emotional weight of any given scene is carried by the color palette is one of the secrets the show is sitting on under the surface of everything else. Held inside the rhythm of the writing is the show's habit of, across the run, sitting on the small moment of pause that often comes at the end of a scene. There are scenes in this show that end on a beat of silence, with the characters standing or sitting, looking at nothing in particular, before the show moves on. Most shows would cut. This one occasionally lingers, in a way that is, on close watch, almost theatrical. The show has not in any direct way drawn attention to this. The audience that notices feels it, and the audience that does not drifts past. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is borrowing, in its quieter moments, the pacing of a different kind of storytelling, the pacing of a stage play or a small independent film, and that those moments are the places where the show is most clearly arguing that it is not only a comedy. The fact is that the show has, by quiet count, more long pauses in it than almost any other half-hour cartoon of its era, and the question of why those pauses are there at all is one of the secrets the show has chosen to keep under the surface. Smallest of these threads is the show's habit of, every so often, ending an episode on a single still image, with no movement at all, held for a beat that is just slightly longer than the audience is expecting. The show uses these moments rarely and uses them on close watch in episodes that have been about something the show is taking seriously. The still image is, in those moments, the closest thing the show has to a signature, the small, quiet acknowledgement that what you have just watched was, in some way, more than the joke. The show has not in any episode drawn attention to this. It has only kept doing it. The fact is that the show, by its end, had a small, accumulated set of these stills, and the question of how many of them you noticed on the first watch is, in some quiet sense, a measure of how the show changed for you as you went along. The show has not told you what to do with the change. It has only made sure to give you the chance. There is one more cluster of secrets to walk through before the night ends, and it is the cluster that fans have, by some quiet agreement, kept returning to more than any other, because it is the one that asks the hardest single question about the show. It is the question of whether the world of Elmore is, in some sense, dreaming, and whether one of the characters at the center of the show is the dreamer. The show has, at various points, played with this, in episodes about sleep, in episodes about coma, in episodes about realities running in parallel, in episodes about reality being rewritten in front of the family. The most striking instance comes in episodes that take you, briefly, into the experience of a character lying still, while the world they have known proceeds at a different speed around them, and the show, in those episodes, is careful to never quite tell you whether what you are watching is happening or remembered or imagined. The show then resets, and the family is back at the breakfast table, and the show treats the previous episode as canonical, even though, by any reasonable account of what was on screen, you cannot know for sure that what you watched was real. There is a reading of the show in which one of the central family members is, in fact, asleep somewhere, and the rest of the show is what they are dreaming, and the show is too kind to ever confirm this. There is a reading in which the show is the dream of a different character entirely, a side figure who's been given more weight than the surface suggests, and the show, in its choice of what to center and what to ignore, is letting you piece this together. There is a reading in which the show is no one's dream, and the small flickers between waking and not waking are just the show playing with its own form. The show has never picked between these readings. It has only kept lining them up. The fact is that the largest single fan theory about the amazing world of Gumball is the one the show has, on every occasion that could have settled it, refused to settle, and the question of whether any of the world you have spent 6 seasons inside was real to the characters in it is the single largest secret the show is sitting on. There is one more, and it is, in its way, the saddest of all of them, because it is the one the show could not have written even if it had wanted to. It is the question of what the show would have been if it had been allowed to keep going at its original pace, without the pause, without the cancellation rumors, without the long-held breath of the years since. The show, as it currently exists, contains a number of arcs that were clearly being built towards something. The Rob arc, the DVD arc, the slow growth of Gumball into a slightly different kind of person, the slow growth of Aeneas towards a future the show could not quite show, the slow easing of Richard into a man his children would respect, the slow drift of Nicole towards a peace with her own past. All of these arcs were in motion when the show paused. None of them are finished. The show, in its current state, contains the seeds of an ending it did not write, and the ending the show would have written, if it had been allowed to, is one of the great unfinished sentences in modern animation. There have been interviews over the years in which the people who made the show have spoken in vague terms about where they had wanted to go. There is no canonical version of that ending available to the audience within the original run. There is, instead, a long-held space in which the audience has been waiting, patiently, for the show to come back and tell them what it always meant. The interpretation, the hopeful one, is that the show is, by now, on the way back, in some form, and that the ending will arrive. The fact, within the frame of the original run, is that the question of what the show was actually building towards is one of the largest secrets the show did not tell you. And the answer, when it arrives, will not be in any of the episodes that already exist. There is, finally, a secret that sits underneath all of the others, and that the show has, in every episode of its run, refused to confirm or deny, and it is the secret of how it has managed, in 6 seasons, to make so many people care this much about a family it had no real reason to expect any of you to love. There are children's cartoons that are watched and forgotten. There are children's cartoons that are watched and remembered. There are children's cartoons that grow in the lives of their audiences into something larger than what the network ever expected, and become the kind of show that people return to in their adult lives, that people quote from across decades, that people, in their quietest moments, used to think about who they are. The Amazing World of Gumball, by some quiet count, is one of these. The show has not, in any direct way, asked you to take it this seriously. It has not in any direct way claimed to be more than the cheerful anarchic comedy it presents on the surface. It has only kept doing the work, in the corners of episodes, in the held pauses, in the color palette, in the credits, in the voice work, in the music, in the patient long arcs that the audience has had to assemble for themselves. And the audience, in return, has built one of the most carefully felt fan cultures in modern animation, with a wiki the size of a small encyclopedia, with theories the show could never have anticipated, with readings of episodes that go deeper than the writers may have intended, with affection that the show has never quite acknowledged it deserved. The secret, the largest one, the one that holds all the others together, is that the show has, with great quiet, built something that meant more to the people who watched it than any of the people who made it could have promised. And that is, in its own way, what the show has always been about. It is a story about a family that is too strange to be a family, and that is, nevertheless, a family. It is a story about a town that is too inconsistent to be a town, and that is, nevertheless, a place you would recognize if you went there. It is a story about a world that is too strange to be a world, and that is, nevertheless, the world you have, for a while, been inside. Before the night closes, there is one more layer worth sitting with, because it is the layer the fans have spent the most time inside, and it is the layer the show has, with most care, kept its hand off. It is the layer of single frames. There are episodes in the run that, paused on the right frame, reveal small drawings, small jokes, small messages in the background that the audience watching at full speed will never catch. Some of these are throwaway jokes for the animation team, the kind of friendly graffiti animators have left in cartoons for as long as the medium has existed. Some of them, on close examination, are more pointed. There are episodes in which a frame contains, in the corner, what appears to be a reference to another episode that will not air for several seasons. There are episodes in which a frame contains a drawing that, in retrospect, looks like a preview of a character that will be properly introduced later. There are episodes in which a frame contains a note that fans have spent years arguing about, with no confirmation from the show on what the note was supposed to say. The show, in this layer, has been at its most generous and at its most private. It has rewarded the audience that pauses on the right second. It has refused to confirm what the rewards are. The fan culture around the show has, accordingly, become one of the most patient, single-frame analysis cultures in animation, with viewers going through episodes a frame at a time and writing up what they have found, and submitting their findings to the wiki, and the show, over years, has watched this happen and has not, in any sustained way, commented. The interpretation, the warm one, is that the show is in on the game, and is leaving deliberate rewards for the patient watcher. The interpretation, the more humble one, is that some of what fans have found is genuinely intentional, and some of it is the kind of pattern recognition that any sufficiently devoted audience will impose on any sufficiently busy show. The fact is that the show contains, in single frames across the run, more material than the audience can confidently exhaust, and the question of how much of it the makers actually put there is one of the last secrets the show is sitting on. There are jokes hidden in the school's notice boards that, paused on the right frame, contain references to news events the show could not say out loud. There are jokes hidden in the shopping receipts and the magazine covers and the television screens within the show, all of which contain, on close inspection, second-order jokes that often have nothing to do with the surface of the scene. There are jokes hidden in the names on the doors at the school, in the books on the shelves in the Watterson living room, in the labels on the cans in the kitchen, in the signs at the bus stop, in the badges on the police uniforms, in the small letters carved into a park bench. The show has used these jokes the way certain other animated shows have used their backgrounds for years, as a place where the writers can plant the smaller, weirder, more politically pointed, more personally meaningful jokes that would never fit into the main script. The show has not pointed at any of them. The fans have cataloged more of them than the show has acknowledged exist. The fact taken in total is that the show is, in addition to being the show on the surface, a kind of running puzzle in its background. And the question of how much of the puzzle was deliberate and how much of it was the audience's own pattern making is one the show has chosen to leave open. That openness is, in its way, the model for the whole run. The show is, in every layer, generous with its strangeness and stingy with its answers, and the audience is invited to spend as much time inside as they like. If you have stayed with me this long, you have already noticed the thing the show was doing all along. The Amazing World of Gumball did not, in any direct way, try to be a show about secrets. It tried to be a show about a family. The secrets are what happened around the edges of that family, in the corners of the rooms they lived in the streets behind them, in the small flickers of awareness in their faces when the camera lingered slightly too long. The show, in the way of every show that becomes loved more than its makers expected, accumulated more meaning than it set out with. The void, the villain, the simulation, the unfinished romance, the lost father, the cold grandparents, the shy ghost, the giant in the woods, the chin-shaped girl who never quite came into focus, the toy in the corner that nobody talks about, the bus driver who is also half the other jobs in town, the parents who held a fragile life together with tape and patience, the children who quietly grew into people. The show did not get to walk all the way through. All of it accumulated slowly into the show that the audience knows. And the audience knows a version of this show that the makers never wrote down, because the version the audience knows includes the silences, the held pauses, the unanswered questions, the doors the show never opened, the DVD the family never returned, the voices that changed and the characters who noticed, the opening credits that quietly evolved across the run and that, lined up together, become a strange small history of the show looking at itself. All of those silences are, in some quiet sense, the show's gift to you. They are the places where the show stopped talking and let you become part of the story. The show, by some patient design, decided that the most respectful thing it could do for its audience was to refuse to over-explain itself. And the audience, with great kindness, accepted that and built around the show a body of love and theory and care that the show, watched today, is, in every sense, larger than it was at the time it was made. The Amazing World of Gumball, taken in its original run, is one of the most carefully made cartoons of its era, and the secrets it never explained are, in the end, part of why it has been loved so quietly and for so long. The questions remain. The doors remain. The void remains humming behind the walls of Elmore, in the place where the show's discarded ideas have always gone, in the place the show was always pointing at when it asked you to look at something else. Some shows finish, and some shows pause, and some shows leave their questions in your hands and go to sleep for a while. And you carry the questions until they come back. That is what this show has done. That is what we have all, in our own ways, been doing with it. Tonight, you have done it in good company, and you have done it slowly. Thank you for staying. Sleep well, if you are here for that. If you are here for the show, then go back to it, with all of this in your head, and watch it the way it has always wanted to be watched, which is patiently, and with the lights low, and with the willingness to let the silences be part of the story. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in